losing jobs, and there's still hope that things will pick up.
Thank you for being here to give us this just a little look at America's unemployment. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to take you now to our live coverage of the House of Representatives, which has just begun for the day.
Let us pray. Eternal and gracious God, we call on your name by your mercy as one nation under your divine counsel. Dear Lord, I lift up to you today these men and women who have been weighted with the vicissitudes of life by the virtue of the office that they have been called to serve for such a time as this. We ask you, Lord, to equip and empower these your leaders by your Spirit to faithfully carry out the duty to the office in which affects our daily lives. Remind them of their divine purpose, to bring hope where there has been disappointment, to give peace where there is chaos, and leadership that promotes unity. Guide their minds to make decisions that embody the good of all of our citizens, and pilot their hands to give voice to the voiceless. This is our prayer in your awesome name. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last days proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from California, Ms. Lee.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from California, Ms. Lee, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to welcome the Reverend Dr. Charlie Haynes to the House floor after delivering today's very powerful opening prayer. Dr. Haynes is an absolutely brilliant pastor at the historic B.B. Memorial Cathedral in Oakland, California. Under his leadership, B.B. Memorial Cathedral has grown from approximately 80 members to over 1,400 members, making it one of the Bay Area's fastest-growing churches. His ministries touch the lives of many throughout the community. In addition to his 19 years in the ministry, Dr. Haynes serves as the chair of the board of the Empowerment Community Development Corporation, a nonprofit organization that fosters community involvement with local government. Reverend Dr. Haynes is the proud recipient of the 2011 CME 9th Episcopal District Pastor of the Year, is an active member and chaplain of the 100 Black Men of the Bay Area, and a director of the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce Board. He is married to his wife, Felicia Brooks Haynes, and is the proud father of 3 children. I thank Pastor Haynes for his wise counsel, for his spiritual leadership, and for his commitment to making this a better world for all God's children. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The Chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the UN General Assembly meeting in New York this week, and with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of the Islamic Republic of Iran giving his usual anti-American rant yesterday, I would like to make a few points about my concerns over Iran's strategic aims in the Middle East and here in the Western Hemisphere. My friends at Kronos Advisory, including Medal of Honor winner Major General James Livingston of Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, released their Al-Qaeda Quds Force Nexus report in April, the text of which I asked to be inserted into the record. Their report goes to the heart of the matter, detailing that Iran has quietly forged a strong working relationship with core al-Qaeda leaders. I am greatly concerned about Iran's growing influence in Latin America. The Treasury Department has stated that Hezbollah's operating center is in the tri-border region of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. Hezbollah's state sponsor, Iran, has opened 6 embassies in South America over the last 5 years. When the lives of Americans could face threats by Iran's growing reach through Hezbollah, why would this administration even consider giving President Ahmadinejad a visa to attend the United Nations General Assembly meeting? I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, last night Roger Schlickeisen was honored for his 20 years leadership as President of Defenders of Wildlife, where it became a key pillar of the American environmental movement. The successful reintroduction of the gray wolf into the American West was an example of his tenacity, skill, and his vision. Whether Roger was fighting to protect our environmental laws from assault or using them for their intended purposes, he showed how, even in difficult times, people would respond to protect what they cherish. That is how he built Defenders of Wildlife into the formidable political and policy force, increasing its membership 1,500% to almost 1 million people. Whether taking his phone call, an office visit, or exploring the Arctic Wildlife Refuge with Roger, his passion was clear to me. Roger provided leadership that matters, which speaks volumes today and will far into the future. Thank you, Roger.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, President Obama went to New York to address the United Nations General Assembly. He did so, remarkably for an American leader, from a position of weakness. As the Palestinian Authority began to campaign to upgrade its status at the UN, this administration wavered and vacillated and did nothing for too long. This was a failure of leadership and leaves us, our Israeli allies, and the ever-tense Middle East at an uncertain crossroads. The President might have been able to rescue the situation with a forceful speech laying down a clear marker of America's support for Israel. Instead, he falsely blamed Israel for the stalemated peace process. I have always believed that our relationship with Israel is unique in world history and critical to both countries. Those beliefs were reinforced when I had the opportunity to visit Israel and meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu in May. President Obama must stand up not only for Israel and the Israeli people, but also for a commitment to the peace process and the rule of law. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask the Senate to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the American people are hurting. They need our help now. It's time for Congress to step up to the plate and live up to our responsibilities. Let's do what is right for the American people. The American Job Act contains bipartisan policies that both Republicans and Democrats have supported in the past. Economics across the nation agree. It will create jobs and give our economy an immediate boost. If we do pass the American Job Act, in my home state of California, over 700,000 businesses will receive a payroll tax cut. $3.9 billion in the infrastructure investment will create over 50,000 new jobs, and over 37,000 teachers and first responders will be saved from layoff. This debate is not about political winners and losers. It's about the struggle of everyday Americans. The next election is 14 months away. Let's come together and pass this bipartisan agenda.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise?
Address the House for 1 minute, providing.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is my honor today to send birthday greetings to a member of America's greatest generation, Dr. R.C. Goodman, Sr. of Fort Smith, Arkansas. This American patriot mobilized with the Arkansas National Guard at the beginning of World War II, earning 2 Purple Hearts and the Combat Infantryman's Badge. And his life was forever changed by the events of May 8, 1945. You see, Dr. Goodman was in charge of a train car full of Belgian POWs just rescued from a German camp. The train wrecked, and Dr. Goodman was one of the few survivors. He later shared with his children the terrific sense of helplessness watching so many die that day, and he made a commitment to becoming a physician so that he would always be able to help in the presence of human suffering. Dr. Goodman, thank you for your service to your country and to your fellow man. And on the occasion of your 91st birthday, America sends its best wishes. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Delaware rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize September as National Childhood Obesity Awareness Month. When I served as Delaware's Lieutenant Governor, I spent a lot of my time helping children in our state understand the importance of making healthy lifestyle choices. I started a program called the Lieutenant Governor's Challenge that help thousands of Delaware students make regular physical activity part of their daily lives. One of my partners in these initiatives was Nemours, a foundation that operates AI DuPont Hospital, a world-class facility for children in Wilmington, Delaware. Nemours works with schools, child care centers, and community organizations to help children make healthy food and lifestyle choices and to stay physically active. If we can help children make healthy decisions at an early age, those habits will stay with them for a lifetime, and we will save money on the country's health care bill as a result. Mr. Speaker, we should follow the lead of organizations like Nemours for the healthy messages they bring to our children in places where they live, learn, and play. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
To request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. President, where are the jobs? You spent nearly $1 trillion on a stimulus bill that failed. Now you want to spend another $450 billion on another stimulus bill. This is simply repeating the same action and expecting a different outcome. Solyndra is an example of the waste and failure of your stimulus bill. This company in the solar industry is a crony of your administration. Solyndra's backers were friends of your presidential campaign, and the company received friendly treatment from your administration. Solyndra was supposed to create green jobs, but now more than 1,000 are laid off. They got a $535 million taxpayer-subsidized loan, but they are now bankrupt, and their officers are taking the Fifth Amendment. We must help the American economy create jobs by freeing job creators from regulations that stifle growth, expand production of competitive and affordable energy, stop threatening job creators with higher taxes, and stop wasting taxpayers' money. Mr. Speaker, no more Solyndras. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 1 minute.
We have two problems in this economy. One is we have a long-term deficit that requires long-term solutions. Second, we have an immediate crisis of high unemployment. We have 23 million Americans who are out of work full-time or out of work part-time. People looking for full-time work that don't have it. 23 million Americans. Why can't we focus on policies that are going to put people back to work? The President's jobs plan will help us do that. What does it do? We start to invest in infrastructure. It is disgraceful that the roads and bridges of this country, that the water and sewer systems in your town and mine are ancient and antiquated. They need repair. They need rebuilding. That is not just money thrown out the door. That's investing in our future where generations are going to benefit from it. Part of the solution is rebuilding our schools. Who among us has not been to a school in our neighborhood or our district that is in desperate need of repair? And we have folks in the construction industry who aren't building houses because of the housing crisis, but can be rebuilding these schools and can be retrofitting our home. We have to focus on putting people back to work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I rise in support of the TRAIN Act, H.R. 2401. This bill provides a common-sense approach that addresses a series of EPA regulations that will cost jobs and cripple our nation's economy. TRAIN requires a commission simply to study the cumulative impact of EPA's regulations, but it would also delay two incredibly expensive regulations, the utility MACT rules and the cross-state air pollution rules. The impact of these two EPA regulations on Kansas would be enormous. The Sunflower Electric Cooperative has been trying to build an 895-megawatt coal plant in Holcomb, Kansas for years. Holcomb 2 will increase our nation's energy supply using environmental controls to reduce air emissions. It's a win-win. Good jobs for Kansas, it's good for the economy, and it's good for the environment. But now this project is in serious jeopardy because of these EPA rules. The Kansas Attorney General has now stepped in, filing a lawsuit in the D.C. Court of Appeals, trying to slow down and stop this rule because it will be physically impossible for Kansas Utility to comply with these rules. The problems for Kansas are the same problems all Americans face because of EPA's refusal to consider the real economic costs of these regulations. Passing the TRAIN Act saves jobs. Let's do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about things that we can agree on. We can agree that the greatest challenge that faces all of us today is to stop the erosion of public confidence. We can also agree that public confidence is critical because that's what's really going to kickstart our economy. We can also agree that when you look and you talk to the people in our various districts, what are they most concerned about? They're concerned about jobs, because what does jobs represent? It represents the security that they need to provide for the most important part of their life, their families. We could also agree that if there's a plan out there that can add to GDP 2%, add at least 2 million jobs, cut employment by 1%, that's a plan we should consider. We can also agree that we want to put teachers, firefighters, first responders back to work, and that we want to build infrastructure so we can be the greatest country that we've always been. And we can also agree that we want tax cuts for employees and employers. So what's the problem, Mr. Speaker? Is it the problem that this is the President's plan? That shouldn't be the problem. Let's get it together and let's work for the people of this great nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 2401.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 406 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 2401. Will the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, kindly take the chair? The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2401, which the clerk will report by title.
Require analyses of the cumulative and incremental impacts of certain rules and actions of the Environmental Protection Agency and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Thursday, September 22, 2011, pursuant to House Resolution 406, all time for general debate had expired. Pursuant to the rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in the bill shall be considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered read. No amendment to the committee amendment is in order except those printed in the House Report 112-213. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable, for the time specified in the report equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to an amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in the House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont seek recognition?
I seek recognition to offer the amendment of Mr. Rush as his designee.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in House Report number 112-213, offered by Mr. Welch of Vermont.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment makes needed changes to the economic analysis mandated by the underlying bill. But fundamentally, this bill itself, we believe, is an assault on the Clean Air Act, pardon me, not really a bill that requires a study. The legislation began in committee as a bill to require a new study on the economic impacts of EPA rules to cut air pollution. Hey, Jerry, can you give me some? At that point, the bill simply requires a burdensome and redundant study of EPA rules and did not affect any of the rules it proposed to examine. It changed in committee. The Republican members amended it to indefinitely delay implementation of two very key rules to reduce power plant pollution, the cross-state air pollution rule and the mercury and air toxic rules. Now, Mr. Whitfield has proposed amending the bill to further eliminate those rules altogether and prevent EPA from being able to clean up power plants in the future. Mr. Latta has offered an amendment to force EPA to listen to polluters' accountants rather than scientists when setting air quality standards. This bill is now a direct attack on the heart of the Clean Air Act. That act has saved thousands of lives. The bill still contains a study on the economic impact of EPA rules, although I'm not sure why it would do that. The Rush Amendment, Mr. Speaker, would make the study required by this legislation a little less biased and a little more useful. The bill creates a new government bureaucracy to conduct a complicated study of EPA rules. It's not necessary. In addition, the bill ensures that the final study will be unbalanced and inherently biased. It's one thing to take a hard look at regulations. It's another thing to cook the outcome of that examination. The Rush Amendment ensures that the committee will look at both the cost and the benefits of EPA rules. The bill's supporters originally presented this bill as a means to gather more facts on key EPA rules. As amended by the Republicans, it's increasingly clear that the facts really don't matter. I support the Rush Amendment, but I remain staunchly opposed to final passage of the bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
To claim the time in opposition and to...
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I rise in opposition to this amendment for a number of reasons. First of all, the Train Act, the underlying bill that we're talking about here, applies to 14 regulations of EPA. It does not delay in any way any of those regulations except for two, and that's referred to as the Utility MACT and the Cross-State Air Transport Rule. And even on those two acts, it only delays the Cross-State Transport Rule by 3 years, and it delays the Utility MACT by 1 year. And the whole purpose of the Train Act is simply to look more closely at the cumulative impact on jobs, on electricity prices, on American competitiveness in the global marketplace. And EPA has done a very thorough job on most of these regulations in calculating benefits, but they have not looked closely in all of them on cost. And under the Train Act, we're simply asking this independent government agency to look at all cost and all benefits. And another reason that I would speak in opposition to this amendment, one of the things that it requires this independent body to do is to examine the effect on green energy companies. Now, there's nothing in the Train Act that's selecting one industry to give some favorable treatment to. And that's particularly what this amendment does. And I might add on green energy, the green energy industry has received increases of 153% of subsidies. Subsidies have increased 153% for green energy. So I don't think that they should be receiving some special benefit from this Rush Amendment, and that's why I would oppose it, and I would ask all members to oppose it, and I would retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Vermont.
How much time do I
You
have?
have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the Clean Air Act, Mr. Speaker. You know, we have power plants that are coal burning and emit toxics into the air. That's not in dispute. But the attack on any kind of regulation says that if there's any expense associated with providing health and safety to the people downwind of the polluting, emitting power plants, they're on their own. They've got to breathe that air, and it's their problem. Now, I live in Vermont, and the coal-burning plants, the air all comes and falls in Vermont. And the Clean Air Act has had tremendous success in actually cleaning up some of these power plants. Now, of course, there's some expense associated with burning clean. But there's also, as you know, Mr. Speaker, an enormous cost associated with burning dirty. It may be cheaper for the power plant owner, and it might even be cheaper for the electricity users of that power plant. But the cost associated with the health, the safety, the environmental impacts are simply offloaded by the polluter onto the innocent members of society who are downwind of the mercury-spewing, polluting plants. So, sure, we can have some debate about what should be the proper expense, but should we really have a debate that it is illegitimate for the federal government to take actions, regulatory and legislative, that protect the health and safety of innocent people? The law of physics has air carrying pollutants going in the direction that nature sends it, and that means everybody downwind gets affected. It's really astonishing that in the legitimate effort to ask legitimate questions about whether a regulation is serving a useful purpose, whether the regulation achieves the intended goal, whether there's a way to achieve that goal at less expense, those are all fair questions. But to abolish the regulations altogether, to suggest that everybody who will be affected by mercury pollution has no remedy and cannot look to the federal government to provide them with some protection for their health, for the health of their children, that's extreme. And it's unacceptable. And it's expensive. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
May I ask how much time I have remaining?
Gentleman from Kentucky has 3 minutes.
Well, I would say first to the distinguished gentleman that while we're delaying this cross-state air transport rule, we have in effect today the CARE Act, which has been in effect since 2005. And EPA itself has said that this act that is currently controlling the crosswind interstate wind movements will reduce sulfur dioxide and NOx emissions by 57 and 63% respectively. And so that regulation is still going to be in effect. And I would also remind everyone that EPA, when they implemented the CARE Act, pointed out that it would have $100 billion in health benefits each year, preventing 17,000 premature deaths, 22,000 non-fatal heart attacks, 12,300 hospital admissions, 1.7 million lost work days, 500,000 lost school days. And it goes on to all of the benefits. And so simply because a court invalidated the CARE Act because EPA was looking at a regional program rather than a state-by-state program does not mean that this is not an effective regulation that's in existence today. And even the many environmental groups actually supported EPA in opposing the effort to invalidate the CARE Act. EPA made strong arguments that the CARE Act was adequate. So all we're doing is we're trying to delay this cross-state rule, which, as I said, even respected independent analysis have indicated that these two rules, the Utility MACT and the cross-state air transport rule, will have a net effect of a loss of 1.4 million jobs and increase electric utility bills by 23%. Now, at a time when our economy is so weak, when we're trying to create jobs, we simply want to look at it more closely, give the EPA a little bit more time. And that's all that we're trying to do with our act, and that's why we're very much opposed to the Rush Amendment. And does the other side have any time remaining?
No.
Well, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Vermont. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The gentleman asks for a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Vermont will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in the House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 112-213, offered by Mr. McNerney of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to offer a simple and straightforward amendment to H.R. 2401. My amendment will help make sure that the reports required by H.R. 2401 are fair, not skewed to support the majority's favorite talking points. It's critical that the reports look at the beneficial consequences of environmental protection, including the fact that good environmental policies create jobs in the clean energy sector. I reject the argument that the majority is making here today. Contrary to what we've heard members of the majority say over and over during today's debate, policies that protect our environment also create jobs. They create good family wage jobs. Before I came to Congress, I spent my career as a clean energy engineer. I helped design windmills that overlooked my congressional district in California, and I've seen hundreds of jobs created in the clean energy sector. But to my great distress, I also watched many of those jobs get shipped overseas to places like Germany because our country did not have the right policies into place to support that industry. I'm committed to creating jobs and seeking more goods produced right here in America, a goal I'm confident that every member of this chamber shares. The clean energy industry is poised to lead the way, but only if we make the right decisions. Policies that promote a clean, healthy environment create new incentives for investments in clean energy, creating thousands of jobs, supporting new industries, promoting exports, and benefiting public health. My amendment simply ensures that we include the job-creating efforts of environmental policies on the clean energy sector in the reports provided by this bill. I'm confident that a fair, unbiased assessment of environmental rules will show that they will create good, family wage, clean energy jobs. I hope the majority will accept this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
To claim time in opposition to the amendment and speak against the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I have great respect for the gentleman from California. I would remind everyone that in his 2008 convention speech, Barack Obama promised to create 5 million green energy jobs. And those jobs have not been created. I would also point out that renewable energy subsidies increased by 186% over the last 3 years, from $5.1 billion to $14.7 billion. Wind, for example, they received a tenfold increase, that industry, from $476 million to $4.986 billion. Solar subsidies increased by more than a factor of 6, from $179 million to $1.134 billion. And then we know that over the Department of Energy, there are loan guarantee programs, And as this article in the New York Times stated, they gave an example of one company that had received $300 million to create green technology jobs. They ended up creating 150 jobs at a cost of $2 million per job. Now, coal, nuclear, and natural gas still provide about 95–96% of the electricity produced in America. And the reason we oppose this amendment is that it also gives special treatment to green energy. And I think it's quite obvious that government programs favor green energy right now, as illustrated by the increase in the renewable subsidies available to them. So our position is, when the three basic, coal, nuclear, and natural gas, are providing the base load to create the industrial growth of this country by providing low-cost electricity, we do not need this amendment to instruct this independent body to look at specifically the impact on green energy exporting companies, and for that reason I would oppose the amendment.
The gentleman reserves time. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I don't dispute the facts of my good friend from Kentucky. Basically what I'm asking is that we make sure that these jobs are counted, that they're not ignored or looked over, which is what I'm afraid will happen. At this point, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my colleague from Oregon.
Minutes.
Thank you. You know, I want to emphasize what my friend from California just said. What the amendment does is to make sure that you add to the analysis the impact on clean energy jobs and clean energy companies. Why wouldn't you want to make sure explicitly that that is a part of the analysis? I invite you to come to Portland, Oregon, to look where we have an emerging wind energy, we think the wind energy capital. It's making a lot of difference in our community and across America. Wind energy, for instance, is the fastest growing in terms of installed capacity. Costs are going down. It is an area that makes a difference to the economy. What my colleague from California is urging is to make sure that it's a part of the study. You know, it's unfortunate that we're to this point this morning anyway. We started this odyssey in 1990 with the Clean Air Act. After 8 years of study at EPA, the conclusion was this is a real problem. And the Clinton administration and the EPA started the rulemaking process. The Bush administration dragged their feet until 2005 with an inadequate response that was thrown out by the courts. Finally now, after 21 years, we're starting to move forward with something that wouldn't take effect until 2015. And in the meantime, there would be many jobs that would be available in construction, in clean technology, at least, if you, I hope you're not successful in stretching this out even further to delay the action, but at the minimum, you would think that you would want to have a full picture. Look at the people like in my community that are producing product, making it available for export. Support this amendment.
Once time has expired.
I inquire to how much time is left on our...
The gentleman from California has 45 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Does the gentleman from California have a right to close? Does he have the right to close?
The gentleman from Kentucky has the right to close.
Oh. Well, do you have anything else to say on the issue, Mr. McNerney?
Well, thank you. Basically, I just want to emphasize I've actually experienced job creation in the green energy sector. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs created. I want to make sure we count those jobs. I don't want this to be a whitewash or anything like that. It's important that this analysis be open and that it be fair and balanced, and that's all we're asking on this side. With that, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields the balance. Gentleman from Kentucky.
I would say to the gentleman, we all recognize the importance of green energy, but there isn't one of these regulations that we're looking to for an analysis that has any negative impact on green energy. In fact, every one of these regulations will help green energy. And as I said, the government philosophy right now is to do everything possible for green energy, more subsidies, studies going on all the time on the impact on jobs, and for that reason, we do not feel that this amendment is necessary, and would ask the members to oppose the amendment. And I yield back balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays on this.
Gentleman asks for a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in the House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wisconsin rise?
Mr. Chair, I rise to offer an amendment that's at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report Number 112-213, offered by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin.
And I do thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment would simply ensure that low-income communities and that the public health generally of all Americans are considered in the bill's section on studies about the impact of this regulation. I offer this amendment, Mr. Chair, in hopes that we might have an honest debate, a debate that is inclusive of those most affected by the very policies that my colleagues are attempting to tie up and in 2 cases outright prevent. Let me be frank with you, Mr. Chair. I was born in 1951, and I grew up gasping for breath most of my life. Lived in an industrial city, a manufacturing city in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I had my first asthma attack shoveling coal into a furnace and then gasping for breath because of the smog that was generated from manufacturing. Thank God for the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. We've seen tremendous health benefits over the years thanks to the work of the Environmental Protection Agency, and not only the bureaucracy but the courts that have made sure the deadlines are enforced and not simply thrown to the curbs. According to a recent EPA study, we've had substantial and hard scientific proof that protecting our nation's air quality from hazardous pollutants is a very substantial benefit. In 2010, the reductions in fine particle and ozone pollution from the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments prevented more than 160,000 cases of premature mortality, 100,000 heart attacks, 13 million lost work days, and 1.7 million asthma attacks. And we do know that the Clean Air Act regulations by the EPA especially help low-income communities who are often impacted by environmental injustices and other vulnerable populations. A recent 2-year-old study by the University of Massachusetts and the University of Southern California analyzed 300 different metropolitan areas and ranked them based on how pollution affects low-income and minority communities. This study cited that air pollution is unevenly distributed within states as well as within them. A growing body of research has demonstrated that people of color and low-income communities often face the greatest environmental hazards. And the area that I represent in the metro Milwaukee area came in the top 10 cities in both cases. Mr. Chairman, I just would like to add my own personal experience to the body of this research. And, Mr. Chair, I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
To claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I would like to remind everyone once again that the Train Act is applied to 14 regulations coming out of EPA. And it's seldom that Congress intervenes in these regulations. But there are so many of these, and the cost of jobs and the cost of buying the equipment and the lack of achievability of many of them to meet the criteria is the reason we want to do this study. But I would remind everyone we do not delay in any way any of these regulations except 2 of them. And I would say to the gentlelady from Wisconsin that I agree with her. Many of the communities that would most suffer high energy prices and unemployment as a result of the EPA regulations are those communities that rely on affordable, reliable, coal-fired energy to light their homes and run their businesses. These communities are the least able to afford increased unemployment, increased energy prices, and the illness that results from unemployment and being unable to afford fuel. And I might say that when EPA does their analysis, they never look at the effect of the health of the children, of the people working in the coal mines and the utility plants who lose their jobs. And there is an impact on it. But I think this is a good amendment that would help the analysis, and I would like to tell the lady from Wisconsin we'd be happy to accept this amendment.
I'm sorry, you'd be happy to accept it, you
Yes,
said?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I do thank the gentleman for accepting this amendment. I do repeat that the 2 parts that this bill had formally included prior to your accepting my amendment would have made it impossible for a state that wanted clean air. They'd find themselves helpless because it would basically eviscerate their ability to prevent pollution from crossing the border. So I do appreciate the gentleman accepting my amendment, and with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back.
I would just like to remind the gentlelady that the CARE Act is still in effect, and as I read earlier, all of the benefits are there that the EPA said would be there, and it's significantly reduced NOx emissions, SOx emissions. We're not doing anything to change that existing law. So thank you for making the amendment, and as I said, we feel like it will really help on this study, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Wisconsin. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is
Mr. Chair, I would like to ask, I would note that there's not a quorum. I would like to ask for a vote on this amendment.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Wisconsin will be postponed.
I'm going to do the same.
Did the gentlelady understand to say that we would accept the amendment?
The lady has asked for a recorded vote.
Oh.
Thank you.
It is now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-213, offered by Mrs. Capps of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Capps, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. You know, it's clear that the goal of the Train Act is not simply to study EPA standards. The goal of the majority is to block the efforts of EPA to cut mercury and other toxic pollution from dirty power plants. That's dangerous, and it's misguided. The research is clear. Unless EPA enforces these standards, there will be more premature deaths, more heart and asthma attacks, more hospital and emergency room visits. Up until recently, I thought that I was safe from this pollution. I don't live next door to a power plant. I live near the coast of the Pacific Ocean. But I learned that you don't need to live near a dirty power plant to be exposed to its harmful effects. I received test results this summer showing that I have an unsafe level of mercury in my body. And I'm not alone. Tens of millions of American women of childbearing age and their children are at risk from mercury and other toxins that are released into our air each and every year. Every year, hundreds of thousands of babies are exposed to mercury. Mercury exposure can cause learning disabilities, developmental delays, and other developmental problems. We owe it to our children to clean up toxic mercury pollution, and that's why I'm offering this amendment. The amendment would simply require that this committee designate the analysis of the true costs of including health effects in blocking EPA's life-saving clean air safeguards. These costs are clear to mothers and grandmothers across the nation. Brain damage, developmental problems, infant deaths. Support my amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
All of us certainly are concerned about impacts on children, and one of the problems that we have with this amendment is that when you try to determine specifically what causes a birth defect, for example, there are lots of different reasons. Folic acid is a B vitamin. Taking folic acid supplements before getting pregnant and in early pregnancy lowers the risk of having a baby with serious birth defects. Drinking alcohol increases the likelihood of serious birth defects. Smoking. Women who are obese when they get pregnant have a higher risk of having a baby with serious birth defects. Poor control of diabetes in pregnant women increases the chance of having a birth defect. So there are lots of different reasons, and it's difficult to set out a causal reason. I would say to the gentlelady from California, who we know is genuinely concerned about these health issues and has distinguished her career by raising them frequently, the EPA did extensive analysis of the health benefits of all these rules with the exception of greenhouse gas. They didn't do any study on anything there. But so we have a lot of information about the health benefits. As far as the mercury issue, I would say to the gentlelady that the Utility Act, EPA itself has said that this would reduce mercury by such a small amount that it would represent only 0.004% of the total claimed benefits of the rule. And the remaining 99.996% would be due to particulate matter reduction. And I would also remind the gentlelady that the Department of Energy and other groups have indicated that 99% of mercury deposits in the U.S. do not come from utility companies, but they originate from nature and foreign industrial sources in which the wind brings them to the U.S. And so we believe that there's adequate information on health benefits, and furthermore, the TRAIN Act does ask the independent body to look at benefits, can be health, whatever, and cost. So for that reason, we would oppose the gentlelady's amendment.
Thank you. I would like to...
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much. You know, power plants are the biggest industrial source of mercury pollution in the United States, and I believe that the remarks of the chairman of the subcommittee, or the chairman of the Energy Committee, underscore the very reason that we should have the studies of the health effects included in the study that is requested by the TRAIN Act. And I'm pleased to yield now to my colleague from Oregon, the champion of livable cities, a minute to speak on this topic.
I appreciate the gentlelady's courtesy. I appreciate your offering this amendment. I mean, you can't, my friends on the other side of the aisle can't have it both ways. There has been a lot of study. For heaven's sakes, EPA has already estimated cost of compliance less than $1 billion, and the savings to American from lives saved, health care costs avoided, and days of work and school not missed between $120 and $280 billion. This is a part of the study effort that has been going on for 20 years. We had hoped that on the 25th anniversary of the Clean Air Act, in 2015, we would probably have full compliance. And yet we're quibbling here about things that the EPA has been unable to monetize, like a birth defect, but for heaven's sakes, it's serious in addition to the hundreds of billions that they can monetize. This is, I think, unfortunate that if this approach is approved, that will enable the Chinese to, may I have 20 more seconds?
20 more seconds.
Will enable the Chinese to get ahead of us again. Remember, I put in the record last night the page of the Chinese Daily where they are moving ahead to reduce emissions. They are willing to incur the costs because of the health benefits, but it's not enough for my friends on the other side of the aisle to go ahead after 25 years. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Does the gentlelady from California have any time left?
Gentlelady from California has 1 minute.
May I ask how much time is left?
The gentleman from Kentucky has 2.5. The gentleman from California has 1.
We don't have any other speakers, so I would wait for the gentlelady to close.
I'm pleased that I do have another speaker, and I'm happy to yield the minute to my colleague from Florida, a mother of 3 young children, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of the amendment offered by my colleague, Congresswoman Lois Capps, and in opposition to the underlying bill, the majority's latest assault on clean air and public health. I'd like to thank Congresswoman Capps and all of my colleagues who have spoken in opposition to this bill, which puts the health of all Americans, especially our children, at great risk. This amendment simply requires recognition of the very real health consequences of air pollution. For example, curbing mercury pollution will protect children and mothers from toxins that damage a developing brain. With this amendment, the required report must assess the effect on birth and developmental defects and infant mortality rates caused by the delay in better clean air standards. What's wrong with that? Who could be opposed to that? For such a small additional effort, this assessment would provide crucial information affecting the health of all American families. As a mother of 3 young children, whose health is among my absolute greatest concerns, I urge my colleagues who are parents and grandparents to take a moment and consider the impact of this bad bill. Delaying EPA's mercury and air toxic standards will have serious consequences on their children and grandchildren. Remember that we are their first line of defense in this world. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this good amendment and opposing the underlying bill. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Well, I would remind everyone just once again that we're talking about 14 regulations. We're not delaying 12 of them in any way. We're asking for further analysis of 2 of them, and for that reason I would oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I ask
and
for
the
a
amendment is
recorded
not
vote.
agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 5, printed in the House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 112-213, offered by Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my colleague from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, for co-authoring this amendment with me. H.R. 2401, the TRAIN Act, is an important bipartisan amendment that hits directly on what Americans, particularly my constituents in Illinois, are facing every day, the high cost of gasoline. Later this year, it's expected that the EPA will promulgate rules on gasoline refiners mandating that they lower sulfur levels and vapor pressure by 70%. This would be even further below the already low levels mandated in 2004. In 2004, the EPA's Tier 2 rules lowered sulfur in gasoline by 90%. The impacts of these new rules could force refineries in the U.S. to slash their gasoline production by up to 14%, leaving the United States even more dependent on foreign sources of oil. Our amendment would require the EPA to study the economic costs of these new fuel requirements. Before delivering what could be a devastating blow to the customer and to our economy, the EPA should first provide data to show lowering the sulfur content will actually achieve cost-effective, real emissions reductions in air quality and health and welfare benefits. Americans are fed up with the volatility in the gasoline markets. While we may not be able to control the price of oil on the global market, we can control the cost of regulations on our fuel. Every dollar that's taken out of the taxpayer pocket due to new regulation is a dollar that's not going to refueling the American economy. We need common sense regulations, and we need to know the impacts of regulations on families and businesses before they go into effect. This amendment's a common sense approach to ensure Americans are getting the cause-worthy benefits that we need out of regulations. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and at this time it's my honor to yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, co-author of the amendment.
The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman.